Welcome back to Pod Save the World. I'm Tommy Vietor.
I'm Ben Rhodes.
Ben, slow news week.
Yeah, not much going on in the world. It's very quiet out there.
Are you excited for another endless conversation about how political candidates handle classified information? Because it seems like we're heading in that direction.
Yeah, who knew this would be the defining issue of our times?
Yeah, really. Deciding election after election.
Yeah.
It is, I don't know, I want to know more.
I want to know more.
It's a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Merrick Garland.
Yeah.
So we got a lot to talk about today. So we're going to talk about, in all seriousness, the national security implications of this FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
We're also going to talk about it because it's fun.
Yes.
Israel's bombing in Gaza. Some possible good news about the Iran deal, the JCPOA. Fingers crossed. Great news about climate change, both here and in Australia.
Fantastic.
Do you think the Rational Fear Pod deserves all the credit for getting that done?
As usual, yeah, those billboards in Times Square.
Yeah, they got it done. We're also going to talk about a historic first for the Marine Corps, reporting on Trump's relationship with his generals, the fascist Coachella festival in Dallas over the weekend with one of your favorite autocrats, Ben, Brittney Griner's case, and then you will hear my interview with a friend of yours, Emily Y. Wu. She's a podcaster in Taiwan. We talk about the Pelosi visit, how it was covered, how people felt about it, the Chinese response, and much, much more. So stick around for that. Let's start with this raid by the FBI. So on Monday, FBI agents took documents from Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate, including, as we learned from Trump's angry statement about it, from his safe, his personal safe. It sounds like they seized materials that Trump brought back with him from the White House to Mar-a-Lago. Trump reportedly has been going back and forth with the National Archives for months about these documents. He took like 15 boxes that he shouldn't have. It does make you wonder if, why would DOJ conduct a search warrant if they're already engaged in these conversations to transfer materials that have been wrongly taken? There's obviously a lot we don't know, and we don't want to be irresponsible because there is a lot of idiocy online right now and speculation about what this will mean politically and blah, 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 and it's all just a waste of time. But I think we can tick through some of what we do know and see that there's some context clues that come from that.
Yes, we are podcasters after all.
That's right.
We can speculate.
We need to talk about stuff. So first, the FBI would need to get a judge to sign off on a search warrant, which means you have to convince that judge that there's probable cause a crime had been committed. There's also just no doubt that Lisa Monaco, the Deputy Attorney General, who we know well, and Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, would have to approve something this serious.
Yeah.
It also seems extremely likely that the FBI would conduct a search if this was just about some mundane document retention issue. Like I don't think this is a Presidential Record Act issue. I could be wrong. We'll find out if I'm wrong, but it seems unlikely. So we do know there was classified information in the boxes Trump took. And again, for context, the President of the United States gets access to whatever intelligence he wants. Top secret, code word level, the compartmentalized stuff the CIA is doing, special Pentagon weapons programs, sources and methods, like who the CIA is paying off for information, et cetera, who they've compromised. So he doesn't just get the report assessing Syria's chemical weapons program that is disseminated broadly. He can get details about how we know the information about their program, the source of the information, maybe how we intercepted some communications channel, maybe covert steps to neutralize it. And then lastly, I've seen some legal analysts say the DOJ wouldn't be so aggressive if this was just about custody of these documents, but only if they thought there was some risk of the materials getting shared, maybe with some sort of foreign adversary. I don't know if that's accurate, but it is worth noting that that wouldn't have to be Trump, right? It could be like some goober who works at Mar-a-Lago could be trying to sell documents that he or she found to, the Chinese government. So, Ben, hopefully that counts as responsible speculation. I'm curious what you made of the report so far and kind of what we've learned over the last 24 hours.
So, yeah, I'd break this into different pieces with all the caveats about what we don't know. First of all, I don't think anybody has accused Merrick Garland of being some trigger-happy prosecutor.
No. Good point.
Very judicious guy. To your point, like I don't think, he knows as well as anyone that when he takes this kind of step, there's going to be precisely the backlash we saw. And so
Lisa too,
and
right?
Lisa Monaco, who
Bob Mueller's
literally,
chief of staff, right?
Sat across the hall from Lisa Monaco for 4 years, totally apolitical human being, career in law enforcement, prosecutor, counterterrorism. So these are not, political hack figures right out to get Trump.
No, the opposite.
The second thing, this is like I'm going to go down a bit of a rabbit hole here, but the nature of filling up the reports were that there were like 15 boxes of classified documents and
That's
stuff.
a lot of stuff.
Well, and first of all, like you didn't actually, I think you barely lived through this transition, Tommy, because you left in 2013 in the spring. But basically, by the end of the second term, we got almost all of our intelligence on an iPad at that point,
the PDB was slowly shifting.
Yeah, the PDB, which I got for most of my time in government, 7+ years, I used to get it in like a binder, but it was on an iPad. And by the way, that iPad would automatically like wipe. So if you were like me and you didn't always return them right away, and you had like a stack of iPads in your office, like there was like after a period of days, that information would go away.
Remember how the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the vice chairman of those guys all had the iPads before anyone else, and they'd bring them to sit room meetings, and people would just like ogle their iPads and be jealous.
Super cool that you had these iPads,
cool,
right? Yeah. And so I only make this point because taking the time to like print out documents or to have like hard copies of documents shows already like a very particular level of desire to have custody of, sensitive intelligence that is unusual to begin with, particularly if it's not just like one report, but if it's like boxes and boxes of stuff. So that kind of raises some questions to me. We know Trump has been kind of casual about this stuff in the past. I think he tweeted out an image from his PDB once before.
Of an Iranian missile launch, basically.
He shared some information with the Russians casually, which we know from reports. So all this is to say, very strange that he has a big volume of classified documents, and those documents could be worth an enormous amount of money, right? Or could be, and again, now we're in a speculation mode, but like these things could either compromise very sensitive intelligence collection methods of the U.S. government or assessments of the U.S. government. They could be potentially very valuable, like market-based kind of information, like predictive of things that might happen or technologies that are being developed. We don't know, but the point is that the potential for there to be a potential risk to American national security, the potential for corruption around the maintenance of classified documents that are of value to, I don't know, a foreign government, say Saudi Arabia or something.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
too.
I mean, if the Saudis have a lot that they want to know about U.S. intelligence collection. We've seen a lot of profiteering. That's just kind of one hypothetical relationship. And then we also just don't know, thus far the white smoke emanating from DOJ, quite limited, but the reporting suggests it's this classified document. But we don't know whether there's any interaction with the January 6th stuff, and whether or not there's classified documents that might also have something to do with what was happening in the run-up to January 6th, because sometimes stuff is classified for a variety of reasons. So stuff that might not be about like foreign phone intercepted conversations could still be classified and shed light on what Trump was up to in that transition period. So there's a lot to ask questions about, but my favorite Republican talking point is that like this has never happened to a former president. Well, yeah, like we've never had a former president like Donald Trump who's such a connoisseur of different criminality,
Yeah, also that narrative is like, oh, this is banana republic stuff. This doesn't happen in democracies. That is ridiculous. The former prime minister of Israel went to prison. Bibi Netanyahu might follow him there. France has prosecuted and convicted former presidents. So is South Korea. And this is in the last 2 decades.
Yeah.
This is what a democracy should do to hold public figures engaged in corruption accountable. And so, the idea that oh, you could be next because they went after Trump. It's like, the point is we're all equal under the law, idiots.
And you here, let's say it's classified document stuff, it's unlikely that you, MAGA head, have 15 boxes of classified information in your house that you refuse to share with the FBI.
Yeah, it's like you, paranoid InfoWars person. You're the center of the universe. We're all coming at the Truman Show, coming after you. It also is confusing, Ben, though, because the president can declassify whatever he wants. If he really needed to do that, he could have declassified it and brought stuff with him. This suggests, not doing that could be sloppy or lazy, or it could suggest you were trying to hide it. Yeah,
And again, I want to come back to this because it's just very strange. Barack Obama didn't have boxes of classified information in the residence of the White House that he had to give back. Why would you have it? The president doesn't need to carry around with him or her, hopefully someday, reams of classified information. The whole thing is very odd,
Yeah. It is. I mean, yeah, Obama would basically, I think...
He'd get his memos for the night, right? The PDB is an iPad, and then maybe he'd get a binder with some memos in it that he would return. Like, there wasn't like a file cabinet of like secret information in the residence of the White House,
Yeah. I mean, look, this is the best we can do based on what's been reported, our best informed speculation. I kind of think that there's some big fact or set of facts that we don't know that explains this.
I don't think that Trump was carrying out the interesting secret level report about agricultural yields in Southeast Asia with him.
Water table management.
Yeah, exactly.
In the Middle East,
just to put a fine point on your, I think, good speculation, which is like they're probably not after this just because they're stamped secret. There's got to be another piece to this that is yet to emerge.
Famously intellectually curious man takes interesting reports.
Exactly.
By the way, he wouldn't even show up to his PDB. We know that too.
Yes.
None of this makes sense.
It's
all so weird. What a weird day yesterday was. Okay, well, the other really big story from over the weekend was there was continued military conflict between Israel and groups in Gaza. So late on Sunday, Israel and the Gaza-based group Islamic Jihad agreed to a ceasefire that ended several days of airstrikes and rocket attacks that have killed reportedly 43 people and injured more than 300 residents of the Gaza Strip. The fighting started last Friday when Israel launched a preemptive strike on 2 senior members of the group Islamic Jihad, which then responded by launching over 1,000 rockets at Israel. The overwhelming majority of those rockets were intercepted by Israeli missile defense systems, the Iron Dome system. But thousands of Israelis were terrified and forced to hide in arid shelters. This ceasefire was apparently brokered by Qatari and Egyptian intermediaries. I saw some truly horrific images over the weekend on Twitter that included, dead or wounded Palestinian civilians, including children. Hamas apparently did not get involved in this fighting. Israeli officials say that's because Hamas, who has this government's capacity, they run Gaza, they were worried about losing economic incentives like work permits. I don't know if it's true, but if it is true, it does seem to suggest that, more carrots, more economic incentives like this that improve conditions in Gaza for average people could have the effect of also making Israelis safer. It would be good to see everyone pursuing that path. This weekend of fighting also, I think, highlights some of the impact of the U.S. funding the Iron Dome missile defense system, which, to be clear, I fully support Iron Dome. It's a defensive weapon that has saved countless lives. But it also does clearly allow the IDF to take what they themselves say were preemptive strikes against targets in Gaza, strikes that killed civilians, in part because they know that there is very little risk of Israel getting hit in response with these rocket attacks. I think 97% of the 1,000 rockets were intercepted. So again, I support the Iron Dome system, but when you hear from critics, some House members of Congress on the Democratic side, that it has the potential to enable more aggressive military action in Gaza, this is sort of what they're talking about. So Ben, these same issues sort of flare up every year or so. Interesting this time that it was the different group was not Hamas, but problem is not solved.
No, and I mean, it is interesting that the reason this was such a more compressed, operation is because Hamas was not involved, right? So Islamic Jihad is not nearly as strong an organization. They don't have as many rockets. Don't have as many, frankly, targets for the Israeli military. I think when you have to step back and look at this, we're 15 years into the blockade of Gaza, and the humanitarian circumstances remain absolutely dire, almost unlike anywhere else on Earth in terms of the degree to which they're just cut off. There's a routinization that feels really dark of reading about children killed in a missile strike, just as there's a routinization of rockets fired at Israel indiscriminately, many of them shot down by the Iron Dome.
Some of them misfired and killed Gazans, by the way.
Yeah, killed a lot of them did. And so I think that what's missing from all this is the plan to address the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. And when there are full-scale wars, as there was last year, you'll often hear around the brokering of a ceasefire how there's going to be some later plan to address the blockade of Gaza, to improve the humanitarian circumstance, to rebuild things that have been destroyed, and you never hear about the follow-through. And so I would hope that there could be some, to use the Biden administration's term, quiet, intense diplomacy with Israel to try to loosen the blockade and improve the humanitarian situation. Because as long as there's this degree of desperation, you're going to have really acute human suffering. And frankly, you're not going to have, to your point about carrots, like the Palestinian leadership, totally dysfunctional. So you've got like the kind of corrupt geriatric Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, and then you have Hamas in Gaza. But like, these are not the conditions through which like an alternative leadership can emerge, you know. Just keeping a complete lid on a place that is already run by Hamas, you know. So I'd like to see some more structural changes in Gaza. I'm not hopeful that that's going to be the case.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Okay, let's stay in the same region, but go to some better news, which is that it appears that there has been some progress in efforts to get the U.S. and Iran back into the Iran nuclear deal, or the JCPOA. Diplomats from the European Union circulated what they hope is a final draft text of a deal. And now the U.S. and Iran, basically their delegates, bring it back to the capitals, and the most senior leaders decide if they have the political space to agree to doing this again. If that happens, then I guess everybody takes a trip to Vienna, you sign some document, you have a ceremony, and we all feel a lot better about the world. So the talks, well, they're indirect talks, because the Iranians have refused to talk to the U.S. side since Trump pulled out of the deal. But the indirect talks have been going on for over a year. Apparently, the last sticking point is that Iran is demanding that the UN close an older investigation into traces of nuclear material at Iranian sites. It seems like that material dates back to before 2003, when basically everyone knows these guys were working on nuclear weapons. There are some additional technical issues to be worked out. Iran does seem to have backed down from its demand that the U.S. rescind the designation of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, as a terrorist organization, which is a big concession. So, Ben, I don't know. What are you hearing from folks about the odds that this thing actually gets done? It's great to hear a little hope on this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's the first time that this thing has come back to life in a while. If it does bear out that they can get into this deal with a formulation that avoids this designation issue, great. We've been critical of Biden for not taking that step and therefore kind of prolonging this. But like, if there's a different way of getting to yes, that's great. This could become like the Joe Manchin about face of foreign policy.
I love it.
And I would celebrate that as robustly as I am celebrating Joe Manchin's turn towards climate change. I do think that we'll have to see here. This is very opaque. We don't really know what the sticking points are. I guess the couple experiences I'd draw on from my time dealing with this with the Iranians and the P5+1 and all the rest of it is, first of all, it really is an equation, right? So you can get fixated on one issue, and clearly that IRGC designation issue was one big sticking point. But when I remember the final negotiating days before the original JCPOA, there's like 4 or 5 things the Iranians want, and there's 7 or 8 things we want, and you trade 3 of those things for half of 4 of those things. And so what we can't see is what the trade space is on different issues. Maybe one will leak it into the press, but there may be 3 other things that are out there. Yep. So it's all just these envoys, and it's harder when the U.S. and Iran aren't dealing directly, but the Europeans have really been dogged in pursuit of this. Hopefully that formula, that Rubik's Cube, can come together. The issue of closing the old investigation, that runs in different directions too. Like, some of that was about what access the international inspectors would get to Iranian military sites.
Yeah, they want cameras.
And now look, obviously you need sufficient access to ensure that no weaponization is happening. So in other words, that they're not figuring out how to weaponize nuclear material at some site. That's the hierarchy of needs is present and future weaponization efforts, right? Yeah. This kind of resolve the past, figure out, through documents or traces of materials, what happened 10, 15, 20 years ago now, is important, but less, I think, important than dealing with it going forward. And then what the Iranians are concerned about is in part not having inspectors show up all over their military bases or across their country, which, again, you can at me, Hawks, but no country would agree to that. If there's not a basis for some inspection. Just snap inspections is something that has no tie into a nuclear issue is not something they're going to agree to either. So this gets a little tricky, but the core of it is, can we be assured that we can investigate all potential efforts to be weaponizing a nuclear program today and going forward? I'm sure that's the bottom line for the Biden people.
Does your scenario make President Raisi the Joe Manchin of this? President of Iran?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, would that make, what is Biden in that case? Like a Schumer trying to figure out how much he can take?
Sure, yeah. So Ibrahim Raisi Manchin. We are such dorks. Okay, different issue. Last week, WNBA star Brittney Griner received a 9.5-year sentence in her trial for possession of vape cartridges in Russia. This was a foregone conclusion. Russian trials, I think 99% of them result in convictions, and clearly she's being held for leverage by Putin. It's obviously awful. Russian prisons are Soviet-era forced labor camps, basically. The good news is that this could open up space for talks or a prisoner swap. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, said Russia is now ready to discuss a prisoner swap with the U.S. So fingers crossed that the U.S. and Russia can resolve this quickly. I don't know whether or not to be hopeful about it. Clearly, the good news is that clearly getting Brittney Griner and Paul Whelan home is way up on the agenda for Tony Blinken and for the White House. Like, they've been out there talking about this a lot. It's just a question of where it lands for Putin, and I think time will tell.
The Russians are clearly playing ball in some kind of prisoner swap scenario here. They're pretty far out themselves and indicating that that's what they're negotiating, right? Their price seems to be quite high. I mean, we've talked about Viktor Bout in the past, this kind of creepy arms dealer who's serving a long sentence in U.S. prison. And that's clearly doesn't seem to be enough for the Russians.
Yeah, they're going to try to up the cost.
Yeah, or else this would be done probably. They seem to want two people, like a 2-for-2 swap. And the reports of who they were asking for include like a former FSB guy who's in jail for murder in Germany, right?
Right, which I don't think we can deliver.
Which we can deliver. So I think what's clear is the Russians are driving a pretty high price for this, which is likely to present a difficult issue for the Biden administration. And it shows you the bind of these things. On the one hand, they get a ton of shit if they don't get these people out of prison. On the other hand, they get a ton of shit for the deal that gets these people out of prison.
Yeah.
I think what you want to evaluate is what kind of risk does the person you're releasing pose? Has the person you're releasing already served a pretty big chunk of a sentence, and like Viktor Bout has? There are ways that you can try to make this more appetizing. Again, the irony here is that the attention on this, I think, probably drives up the price that the Russians are asking for. They know this is now getting a lot of attention, and they're going to leverage it.
It's very, very possible. So fingers crossed there. Hopefully make some more progress. So more good news here, Ben. Big news on climate change.
Yeah.
So Biden is going to sign the Inflation Reduction Act, hopefully pretty soon, into law, and it has $370 billion worth of climate change and energy spending, and it's a massive, massive, massive step forward. But also, Australia is on the cusp of passing a bill that would commit the Australian government to reducing emissions by at least 43% below 2005 levels by the end of 2030, getting to net zero by 2050. That's a big deal because Australia is actually currently the world's third largest fossil fuel exporter. They have very high carbon output per capita. The Green Party in Australia was pushing for even more reductions, but this progress obviously is the result of the recent election that put in a more progressive administration. So Ben, the next big climate summit, COP27, is coming up in November in Egypt. That location is weird, problematic for a lot of reasons. Yeah. But I mean, I
won't be going to that one.
Yeah, no shit. Nor should people protesting. What do you think Biden can kind of do now that once he pockets this law? Do you think we're going to go and push Europeans and developed countries for more emissions cuts? Do you go and rally for more financing for developed nations to shut down coal plants? Long term, obviously, the idea is develop all these technologies that create more green energy, give them to other countries, reduce emissions globally. But what do you think we can get done this year?
Well, I mean, a couple things. First of all, there's an interesting security piece to this bill, especially if you combine it with the CHIPS Act, the semiconductor bill. This bill has these big investments in climate, but they're also tied to securing a supply chain of clean energy for the U.S.
Yeah, and doing manufacturing in the U.S.
Manufacturing in the U.S., the solar supply chains, they call it onshoring, keeping it in the U.S. so that we're not overly dependent on pieces of our kind of clean energy supply chain into places like China in the same way that the CHIPS Act does that. I just note that because we're in an interesting phase where the U.S. government, and the Biden administration in particular, but Congress too, is kind of anticipating really rocky international geopolitical waters over the next decade or two, right? And can no longer count on kind of global supply chains. And so I think that's just worth noting, that there's this kind of shift to like what we would call industrial policy, or kind of picking industries and sectors and supply chains that we are going to protect from vulnerability to geopolitics or Russia, China, another part of the world. That's the first thing. I think that the other thing is what you really want to do, you want this investment, which is really big, to count for both more domestically and globally. So like domestically, the $80 billion that was in the Obama stimulus and the Recovery Act for renewables like ended up having a much bigger impact than that $80 billion. It basically seeded and catalyzed an exponential growth in wind and solar, for instance, in this country.
It's the only reason we have that industry.
It's the only reason we do. We subsidize the hell out of it, and then the market comes in on top of your money. So on top of that $80 billion, once people see, oh, this is going to be a new and cheaper way to develop energy, there's all this investment that flows in that direction. The trick globally is for governments to make it cheaper to move in the direction of renewables so that the same thing happens globally. And so I think what they're going to answer your question, what they're going to be trying to do is use this to kind of kickstart the momentum. There's been all this talk about climate financing and transitions, et cetera. But with the U.S. government putting this kind of real money on the table over the course of the next decade and showing that, this is the future of how big developed economies are going to be getting their energy, that over time is going to catalyze a lot of investments by individual countries, but also just kind of market-based corrections in the direction of renewable energies. And they just want to get, well, I guess to use a climate metaphor, like that snowball rolling down the mountain to be as big as possible. So that's one thing. I also do think that like the U.S. has been on the back foot at the negotiating table on some other climate-related issues, emissions targets, methane, et cetera. And I do think this allows you to go around to some other countries and say, okay, look, we just kind of took a very clear, verifiable step on behalf of our commitment. What are you prepared to do to make this next summit a bigger success? India or Brazil or countries that have been moving in not necessarily the right direction. What can we do to raise ambition with Europe? What can we do to take advantage of the fact that Australia's at the table? So you want to piece all that together if you're John Kerry, and assuming John Kerry's sticking around.
Yeah, well, we've got a lot of work to do, but hopefully it's a little bit easier now. It's remarkable how much a better place we're in than we were a month ago.
Oh, on climate,
it's shocking.
And this is everything on climate. I mean, if this money didn't get out the door now, like who knew when the next chance was? I mean, that's why this is so huge.
Could have been decades.
Yeah.
Different issues. So Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban was at CPAC, or the Conservative Political Action Conference, a few days ago. If you're new to this show, you haven't heard us talk about Orban. He's an autocrat. He is strangling Hungary's democracy, or has been for a decade. He gets rid of the independent media. He gerrymandered districts. He's stuffing the courts full of his cronies. Bad guy. A few weeks ago, Orban gave a speech where he said, "We Hungarians are not mixed race, and we do not want to become a mixed race." His own advisor called that a Nazi diatribe worthy of Joseph Goebbels. I think some people thought, oh, well, will CPAC let him speak now? I never doubted that they would.
It didn't seem to be a lot of pause and reflection.
No, it was a terrible organization run by terrible people. It was interesting to hear Orban's speech, Ben, and have him, he talked about the need to make common cause and coordinate activities very overtly. And he linked the success of the far right in Hungary with the success of the far right in the U.S. He almost sort of dissolved nations and was like, we are just like, right-wing
International,
exactly.
Yeah, what the communists used to be.
The globalists he decries.
Yeah.
Look, there was CPAC Hungary not long ago. I'm curious, how successful you think this coordination has been, because certainly Republicans in the U.S. are explicit about now seeing Orban as a model. Tucker Carlson went over there, spent a week, lavished praise on Orban, but it's not like they needed Viktor Orban to be anti-immigrant, pro-gerrymandering, and to stuff the courts full of right-wing judges. I'm curious what you think the impact is of this kind of trade of best practices at this point.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you're new to this podcast and haven't heard me plug my book, I apologize. But I mean, because after the fall, my book that came out a year ago is about this. It starts with Orban and the symbiosis with the Republican Party. And so, part of it is there is a real aspect to this. It's the playbook is the same, right? Gerrymandering, packing courts with right-wing judges, buying up the media and turning it into propaganda, changing voting laws. They really do share a common playbook. There also is very real coordination. So Orban has used American political consultants, right-wing political consultants in his past political runs. He's, been advised by American, Steve Bannon types in the same way that him having a foothold inside of Europe is this kind of source of, inspiration and to American right-wingers who like the fact that Orban says the quiet part out loud. Like he's been saying for years, things like we should be moving away from liberal democracy to illiberal democracy and nationalism and blah, blah, blah. I think there's another aspect of this that's interesting to me, though. Like the thing that Orban also has in common with the American right, beyond their mutual loathing of George Soros, which borders on complete fanatical obsession, is this thirst to own the libs, whether they're the Hungarian libs or the Brussels libs, or and to people like you and me, it's just kind of mystifying how animating this can be to their political movements.
Yeah, they hate us.
But it really does demonstrate that there's this kind of global effort to own the libs, and that's, if you looked at his speech, that's what it was about, like mocking gay marriage and mocking George Soros and mocking transgender people and making pronoun jokes. We are in this kind of weird era where the nationalists, I would argue, have kind of become globalists, because they've globalized their preoccupations, who they cast as the other, how they try to own the libs. And I think this is, to turn it inside out, like, if what's scary about this is that there's this kind of weird global axis of far-right autocrats. Yeah, shit posters. I think it's a vulnerability. Like, at a certain point, like, I don't know, that there's not much underneath that ideology. If it's just an ideology of owning liberals wherever they are, like, you're not solving problems. You're not, like, creating economic growth. You're not, like, dealing with issues people actually care about. Like, they're not even really talking as much about immigration. They still do, but like pronouns seem to get more energy than immigration. Yeah. Like, so I actually think this is a vulnerability for them, I
hope that's true. I want that to be true. 2016 me would have jumped up and down to say how right that is and how they need to get shit done. But then, you think about like Heather McGhee's book about like drain pool politics and, the role that racism and punishing your enemy is played in animating politics in the U.S. for so long. And I don't know. I wonder. I hope you're right. I'd rather you be right.
I mean, I'm sure I'm partially wrong. I mean, I guess the question, because to take Heather McGhee's, everybody should read that book, by the way. It's a great book.
Some of Us.
Some of Us by Heather McGhee. And by the way, great anecdote you mentioned, which is that, like, literally they, rather than integrate pools in the South, they literally just drain them.
It's the equivalent of taking your ball and going home from the playground.
Screwing the white working class just so that the black working class can't swim in pools. But I the trick, I guess, is like, how do you make them either overreach, or how do you make them appear so out of touch that they can pay a price for it at a time when European voters and American voters are concerned about things like inflation? I don't know. I think, like, Viktor Orban clearly just feels so secure at home that, his audience is now like Tucker Carlson and like CPAC. It's not even Hungarian. I mean, they're probably not sitting in rural Hungary thinking about pronouns. It just shows you how much the American far-right agenda has now colored people like Orban, who once may have been models for the American far-right. He's now totally mimicking the American far-right talking points.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm hoping that their overreach is starting. I mean, there's a story today about Nebraska police subpoenaing a teenage girl's Facebook DMs because they wanted to prosecute her for having an abortion.
Yeah.
Like, I suspect that that's the kind of thing that would offend 80% of the country.
Yeah.
Or that everyone would think is wrong. Even if you're personally pro-life, you don't think the U.S. government, the cops should be like going after teenage girls for having a medical procedure.
Yeah, and I think if you're to turn it to the Hungarian perspective, like, I'd be making the case to the Hungarians, like, why does it help you guys if this guy's in, like, Texas yelling at a bunch of nutcases about pronouns? Like, what does that do to solve gas prices in Hungary, or what does that do?
The challenge for those people is Orban's buddies own all the media, right? So they have to get that message out.
They have to get that message out, like, guerrilla style.
The hard way. Here's another good story. On Saturday, Ben, General Michael E. Langley became the first black Marine to receive a 4th star, the first in the Corps' 246-year history. So during his 37-year career, General Langley served in Afghanistan, Somalia, Japan. He had senior jobs at CENTCOM and at the Pentagon. He's now going to command the United States Africa Command. Our friend Helene Cooper over at the New York Times wrote a great piece about Langley's promotion that just talked about how much you could see in real time how he was inspiring these younger black Marines. They mobbed him for pictures or handshakes, just to, like, kind of see him was powerful. It also, frankly, underscores just how much work the U.S. military has to do when it comes to diversity, especially at these senior ranks. The Marine Corps was integrated in 1942. Since that time, 73 white men have achieved 4-star rank, and now just 1 black man. Yeah,
and there have been a lot of black Marines in that time, right? I mean, I think what's important here is obviously leadership at the top, 4 stars, that's the highest ranking you can have. But also, like, filling in those higher officer ranks too, right? So other general officers, 1, 2, 3-star generals, colonels, because, like, my experience, working in national security is, like, you would go into a big hall or mess area full of, enlisted people, privates, et cetera, incredibly diverse, right? Like, in fact, like, probably overrepresented black and brown people. And then the higher up you get in the ranks, the more it's just like white men with crew cuts, And so I think that, like, important and welcome and a step to celebrate. Hopefully they're also continuing to work on just that entire senior officer corps being more diverse as well. And again, this is not for lack of people signing up, right?
No, what's important to understand is, like, an up and out system too, because you either advance or you're kind of retired.
Yeah, exactly, at a certain point.
So speaking of generals, there's a new book about Trump's relationship with his generals during his time as president. 2 reporters, Susan Glasser at The New Yorker, Peter Baker at The New York Times, they worked on this together, they're married. So The New Yorker published an excerpt from the book. In my unending effort to just trigger Ben on the pod as we go, I'm going to read a couple excerpts. So the first one is deeply unfunny, just disgusting. Trump told John Kelly, his chief of staff, and retired general who had lost his son in combat, that he didn't want any wounded veterans in a proposed July 4th military parade in D.C. because this doesn't look good for me.
Yeah, just complete monstrous asshole.
Dark. We talked about this on PSA on Monday. I do hope that John Kelly will have take the time to say this on camera at some point. It doesn't have to be a TV ad. Just do an interview that someone can use later. Yeah,
I mean, insofar as, there's a chain of command, like the second Donald Trump became commander-in-chief, like the people that were getting grievously wounded were doing so on his orders. Like, I'm sorry, that doesn't look good for you. Like, it's not easy for the person who's disabled for the rest of their life either,
Yeah, I sent this to a friend who got shot in Iraq, and he was just like, you've got to be fucking kidding me.
Yeah, I mean, what other evidence do you need that this guy's wrapping himself in the flag? This utter bullshit.
Yeah. Also, Ben, so apparently Mike Pence...
Can I make one more John Kelly point?
Please.
Were you going to do the Nazi generals thing?
Tell that story.
Okay, because the other thing that got a lot of attention is like Trump saying, like, why can't you be more like the German generals? And he's like, what German generals? And he's like, Hitler's generals. And I'm actually going to use this. We'll come back to why that's gross for Trump. Well, actually, we don't need to. It's just gross, right? I mean, who wants Nazi generals?
You don't want
Nazi
generals. It's a good rule of thumb.
But I also think, like, and this is not really a shot at Peter and Susan. It's a shot at John Kelly. Like, I did not believe the dialogue. The dialogue was like, because it was so John Kelly was like, can you be more like the German generals? What German generals? What? All right, stop there. Like, what did John Kelly thought, like, today's German generals, right? Like, and then he's like, the German generals that Hitler had. Then he's like, let me tell you, sir, the German generals tried to kill Hitler 3 times. Right. Like, it just didn't sound real, right? And and a lot of this John Kelly stuff, it has the ring of truth. Like, I certainly believe that Trump made some comment about wanting German generals, but it always ends with, like, John Kelly facing him down, like, just come and tell us this. Like, these things keep popping up in books or...
Yeah,
like,
the excerpt read like a Mark Milley authorized biography.
Yeah.
or John Kelly as well in parts. It's,
I don't
a
know.
lot of people doing a lot of talking.
Yeah, it's just come on, tell us these things. Give an interview. Like, tell us a story. Like, instead of recreating this, movie drama dialogue for books. Like, I don't know, something about it's, I'm getting a little tired of it.
I'm with you there. The other thing that really jumped out at me, a couple more things. Mike Pence was advocating for Trump to take tough measures, that's how they describe it in the excerpt, against Iran in the final days of the administration. So it's not totally clear if that means a military strike from the context. It very much seems like it is. But then General Milley says, why do you want to do this? And Mike Pence said, because they are evil. So good to know that kind of Bush era, religious, us against them, axis of evil stuff is very much alive and well. Mike Pompeo does a lot of reputation rehabbing in this book, and it's infuriating. So they report that Pompeo was quietly opposed to the post-election coup efforts.
Oh, thanks.
Despite very publicly backing them and saying, we're going to transition to a second Trump term.
Yeah, after the election, he said publicly at the State Department podium, we're transitioning to a second Trump term.
Yeah, and so they had it was important for Pompeo to serve until the very last day because he's a Committee to Save America guy.
What was Mike Pompeo saving?
What role was the State Department playing in preserving democracy? It's unclear to me. Pompeo testifies before the January 6th committee today, Tuesday, as we're taping, so we might learn more. And then, no surprise, Ben, the Bibi Netanyahu was pushing for Trump to attack Iran even in December before Biden's inauguration. There
are just a lot of people that very committed to a war with Iran for a variety of reasons.
Evil.
Evil. Milley was worried that Trump was going to attack Iran to distract from the election or something, for political purposes, to own the libs. There's just a lot of reasons that people really want a war with Iran, and I don't think it's a good idea.
It's got to be a better way.
There's got to be better ways to own us without starting wars. Or, and all these Mike Pompeo. The guy, his reputation rehab, spare me, pour one out for Mike's reputation.
Not going to happen.
Yeah.
Ben, two more things. Here's a headline for you from Reuters. Quote, a sinkhole in Chile has doubled in size, growing large enough to engulf France's Arc de Triomphe and prompting officials to order work to stop at a nearby copper mine. Here's my question. You didn't stop mining when the sinkhole was half the size of the Arc de Triomphe?
Yeah.
Also, what is this point of reference, Reuters?
I saw that, though. I actually clicked on the image overlay, and I was like, well, that's a big sinkhole. The Arc de Triomphe's pretty fucking big, They
also say 6 Christ the Redeemers.
Yeah, this is not something we need. There's enough shit going on in the world without a sinkhole like that in Chile.
160 feet across, 656 feet deep. That's a big sinkhole. Yeah, maybe stop mining.
Well, friend of the pod, Bernadette Meehan's headed down there to be our ambassador.
Did she get approved?
Yeah, and so she'll have to look into it, but not get too close.
Not physically.
Not look into it too closely.
Not too deep in it.
Maybe there's a helicopter ride or something. I don't know.
Bernadette worked with us on the NSC. She was a hot shot for Hillary Clinton at the State Department. One of the smartest, nicest
Which stayed at the
people
NSC till the bitter end too. Yeah.
Indeed, it was bitter. Last story. This one comes from the New Yorker. Apparently, you don't want to be named Kevin if you live in France. The name, according to this report, peaked in the early 90s, probably thanks to Kevin Costner and Kevin McAllister. If you like the movie Home Alone, I believe they went to France, right?
Kevin McHale. You're
Kevin
the
McHale. There's another one. Yeah. You're right. I left him out. But now the name is shunned and viewed as a crude cultural import. So a French guy named, I'm going to butcher this one, man, Kevin Favreau launched a campaign to fund a documentary called Save the Kevins, that's how it translates, about the need to save the name from snobs and discrimination. One watchdog group says that job candidates named Kevin had a 10 to 30% lower chance of getting hired for a job than a dude named Arthur. I wonder how they came up with Arthur for this comparison.
I don't... Did I miss it? Is this like a Karen type thing? What's the critique of Kevin?
I think that there's no
Kevin,
roots. There's no roots in French culture. It's an Irish name.
So they just don't like the name.
Yeah, they just don't like the name, and it makes you sound like you're, lower class, I guess.
Come on.
What I want to say is...
This is when the French kind of get on my nerves a little bit. I
sure.
love the French.
Yeah.
I love... It's like that, that friend you have that you really love, and they have these eccentricities.
Yeah.
Just go easy on the Kevins.
I think it's time for Kevin's, Bacon, Hart, Durant to step up.
Well, Durant's not really...
Get your asses to France.
Durant.
Durand.
Kevin Durand. You could francophone that name.
That would be good. They could go play some hoops. I would ask that Kevin's Spacey and McCarthy, you sit this one out.
Spacey sit this one out. That maybe they'd like the name more if they adapted the Americanized Kevbo.
What's
right?
Kevbo?
Like, hey, Kevbo.
Like, is that a Trump thing?
That's a thing. That's a thing that people do.
Sure.
I've heard it.
I don't know a lot of Kevbos. Really weird. So strange that the French don't like people named Kevin. I don't get it.
Yeah, I guess it is one of these names that doesn't like Tommy. There's like a Tomas option or something. I guess there's not really a francophone option for Kevin. Is that? I mean,
who knows? Who knows? Okay.
But why hit on the Irish side? I mean, everybody likes Irish. Everybody likes the Irish.
You got to be careful.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it for us this week. But we'll talk to you next week.
See ya.